Good morning, good afternoon, all, and welcome to IOX Office Hours. I am with Rick Spencer today, our VP of Product, and I'm really excited for him to take you through his tutorial in Jupyter Notebooks today using InfluxDB IOX. So, Rick, if there's anything you'd like to say, but if not, take it away.
Yeah, I know people who are watching this are going to be watching it on a recording. So if you have any questions about this content or any questions about InfluxDB or especially about IOX, just find me in the community Slack. I go by Rick Spencer 3. I should have put that as my name instead of just Rick. So Rick Spencer 3. I'll add it to the notebook at the end so people could see. So I just burned through this content. Let's just talk about Jupyter Notebooks and Python and Arrow and Plotly, and using those a little bit with InfluxDB, but just using them in general. So first of all, if you're new to the world of Jupyter, like what are Jupyter Notebooks? So Jupyter Notebooks support what's called interactive computing. That means that you can go back into the code and like iterate it on place and then in place. And you can have code blocks where you can go back and rerun specific code blocks. The reason I have this italicized is I'm not actually going to do that today because there's another way that you can use it, which is just sharing reports and visualizations. And so that's what I did today. Basically made a report that I can just run everybody through and show some of the concepts about using Jupyter. I italicized Python because though it supports multiple languages, I think Python is by far the most common to use. Another nice thing about Jupyter is that it's kind of got this whole web server via in a browser thing. So you can share your code, you can share your reports over the web pretty easily. But I personally am using right now, as you can see, the VS Code support. So you can actually like edit these in VS Code. This is a nice for situations like this or where you're not sharing it because now you have no extra server to run. So that's a quick overview of Jupyter, and you'll see how cool it is as we go. Now there may be some other concepts. I'm just going to cover them real quick. So if you're wondering like what is Arrow, maybe you've heard about Arrow. So Arrow is part of the Apache project, and it's basically a developer platform for working on data in memory, especially for like really fast performance on really big data sets. And the bigger your data set, the more benefits you get from Arrow. It's a standard, which means, it can be implemented in all different languages. It's implemented in Python, as you'll see here. And then there's something that comes with it that you may hear about called Flight SQL. So Flight SQL is a client server protocol that any database can implement. That basically at a high level, you can have your client code here, and you can send your SQL to Flight SQL. That will query the database and then send back Arrow to your client code. So it's basically a protocol that sits in front of your database. Of course, InfluxDB implements it. That's why I'm able to show it today. Okay, there's another thing that you've probably heard of called pandas, and pandas is also a Python library that is really for data manipulation. And what it does is it creates this concept of a data frame, which is sort of the core object in pandas. You may think of it sort of like a table, but it's better to just think of it as its own thing, a data frame. One of the nice things about pandas is that it is really tuned for time series data, allows you to window and etc. Pandas is extremely, extremely powerful. And combined with Arrow, pandas allows you to do massive data processing on like large amounts of data, really high performance way. And also it's got every function that you could ever need in it. But I'm barely touching on it here. You'll see I just like barely skimmed the surface of using it. Okay, so then what's Plotly? For me, Plotly goes with pandas like peanut butter and jelly. which I suppose is a very American reference, but that means like they go really well together. So Plotly creates visualizations essentially. Really tuned to go with Python in my opinion, but you can use other languages with it. And I'm going to show you how easy it is to use, but you also have to understand that you can go super deep in customizing it for things like branding, but also usability. Okay, so let's go. We got a little bit of code here, so let's start looking at code. So all of these here, all of these areas, these were all markdown sections. But this here is a code section. This here, I don't know if you all saw my notification there. This here is a code section where I'm basically just setting it up for the rest of the application. So I can run just this cell. I can run everything below it. I already ran it. But I pull in some local configuration here. I import the Flight SQL library, and I import Plotly as well. And then I instantiate the Flight SQL client. So in the rest of the code, I just call it client, and I just pass it some basic configuration. I stuck those off in its own module just so that I could share this module without disclosing all my other information. All right, so now that I have all that set up, you can see I'm actually querying InfluxDB with it. Just in case you're wondering, what is InfluxDB? It's like the first real-time series database. It's the most popular one by far. It's offers high performance, scalability, but also we have a new storage engine called IOX. That's what this is here. IOX is the storage engine, and it works with Apache Arrow's format for really fast, efficient querying and sending that back over Flight SQL. So all of this demo is done with InfluxDB, but you can use it with any database that supports Flight SQL. Okay, so now let me show you, just give some background on what my data is. So the first set of data I'm going to work on is in this table called checks. In InfluxDB, a table can also be called a measurement. So it's called checks. And what a check is a ping to a web server where I like ping an HTTP endpoint and it returns some information like the status code, how long it took, the time. So the elapsed is the time period, is how long it took. That's the latency. And time is the actual timestamp. So all tables in InfluxDB have a timestamp, and it's on the column called time. There's a couple tags that I send with it just so I can know like what is the ID and name of the check. There's some other data in there, but that's all you need to know for this. So the first thing I do is I write a SQL query. And if you're a longtime InfluxDB user, you may be like, whoa, Rick is writing SQL against InfluxDB. And they say, yeah, like that's one of the main things that IOX brings to the table is IOX is built on standards upstream in Apache. And that means now you can use standard tool like Flight SQL and use SQL. And so now you can see I'm like integrating really easily InfluxDB into Jupyter Notebook. So all I'm doing here is retrieving the elapsed time. I have to divide it by 1,000 because I want to display it in milliseconds, but in the database, it's stored as microseconds. And then I need the time column. So that's all I need. Oh, but then I also need to bring the name column because what I want to do is I want to order by name and time because that is the output that is going to be necessary for graphing it. So all I have to do is execute the query. And so there's a few functions that I'm going to use. I'm going to use client execute to send the query, but then I actually get back from Flight SQL like a ticket that tells me like where to actually get the data. So I execute the query and then I go back and get the data. And then in this case, I'm just reading all the data in, and then I'm turning it into a pandas data frame. And you'll see why I'm turning it into a pandas data frame in a second. Now this read all, it just dumps all the data in. But if I'm bringing back massive amounts of data, there's some other options. I might want to use read and just only read back a certain number of lines. Or I might want to iterate through and do something as I go through. So just depending on how much data you have, you can decide how to read the data. But this isn't so much data, especially for Arrow. So I'm just going to call read all and make it a data frame. Okay, then, and this is the actual code here. So this code has been executed. It's run the query, turn into a data frame. But now I want to pass it into Plotly. And now when I'm passing into Plotly, I'm just going to use something called Plotly Express, which is like a really high level interface into Plotly that just makes it super easy. So I can just, if I want to scatter plot, call scatter, line plot, just call line, and so on, and just send it in different, different parameters. So here's how I'm making the line. So this is the code. I want to make it's called figure. And then it wants to know what I want on the X axis, which is I want time, what I want on the Y axis, which is the elapsed time. And then this tells it how to organize into lines. And then I get this nice table. So this is the Plotly table, part of my report. It's actually interactive. So if I want to, I can just go through and hide ones that I don't want. Now I can just look at, just one of the checks that if I want, for example. So here you can see what I did was I sent all of the data. I asked for all of the data for, if I go back to the SQL query, I said, give me all the data for the last day, right? And then I dealt with it on the client. I just plotted every single data point. But then there's this thing called binning that you can do. So binning is basically, instead of showing every single data point, you can aggregate it. And you can say, just show me like the mean for every 10 minutes or the max in every 10 minutes. And so it makes these lines much smoother and easier to read. But it can also have some other benefits. So you have to decide, do you want to bin on the server or do you want to bin on the client? So that means like, do you want to bin in your SQL or do you want to bin in pandas? And there's some pros and cons. So if you write binning in your SQL, that means like your machine isn't doing the work, but the InfluxDB server is doing the work. It also means like that InfluxDB is really optimized to do that binning, and it sends back way less data. So it can be like way faster to binning there. But it means like you can only get back what the SQL does. It may be harder to write the SQL to do what you want. And if you're running your own database, you may actually decide you'd rather not put the load on the database, but you'd rather put the load on the client for doing the binning. So then if you want to do it in pandas, which means get all the data and do the binning in pandas, this gives you a lot of flexibility. There's a lot of binning functions that are available in pandas. And then, as we said, there's just like a lot more data that comes over if you bring it all, do it on the client. So there's pros and cons either way. I'm going to bin on the server. And so you can see here, I wrote some SQL that uses the date bin function and creates a new column called binned. And I just go ahead and basically do what I did before. And I do the same grouping so that it's ready for graphing. And then I just run the same code again, basically. Notice here, though, when I ran it, this came out a little messy. Like it's all blue, just doesn't look quite right. And that's because I actually didn't pass in this color property. So the color property tells it what column to use to break it up into lines. So I told it to use name here. And so now you can see how much smoother this is than the last one, right? And it's smooth because it's binned. Basically, taking the every 10 minutes, I'm taking the average. So it's the average every 10 minutes. And so it's not like every single data point. So it's not so jagged. It's much smoother. Okay, but you notice here it's called binned. I don't like that. All right. Here's kind of some of the stuff that you can do on pandas. This is very, very scratching the surface of pandas. But like, since I have the data frame, I can just rename it in place. And so I just say rename bin to time, and now I have the graph says time. Much nicer. Okay, so finally, I just want to point out that if you want to go deep, there's this namespace called graph objects in Plotly. And so let me show you just a bit of a different scenario and how you might use that. So as my code runs, it writes more time series data, which is called anomalies. So just the text like errors or latency, and then timestamps when it finds those. And so it has a table called anomalies, which has that data. So then I just write a simple SQL statement here, which just get the time, just basically gets the data that I want to look at. And let's just say I just want to look at the data, right? So what I'm going to do here is just call pandas and just print out the data frame. I can see, okay, that has the data that I want. But it's like, it's not interactive. It truncated a whole bunch of the data. Okay, so the data's there, but let's make it more easier to read and more nicely formatted. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to import the graph objects namespace. Then I'm going to create a Go figure. I'm going to pass it a Go table object, which has all the parameters that I want to set it up, especially a dict for the cells. This describes what the cells are. And I can just grab those cells from the data frame. So for each column in the data frame, I'm saying that I want a cell. And then for the headers, I just want it to be the column headers. Pretty easy. So I run this, and now you can say, see, Plotly gives me this super nice table, which is interactive, and I could go on to customize it as I wish from there. So, oops. So that's that. Just as a last note here, I'll add some markdown here. I don't know what I did there. Okay. There we go. All right. Okay, Jay. That's it.
Sweet. Thank you,
Wrap
Rick.
it up. I'll be looking forward to hearing from folks.
Sweet. I've got 2 questions for you just to answer away, if that's okay.
Oh, sure.
And then we'll
Yeah.
wrap up. So first question is, can I only use Plotly in Jupyter Notebooks, or can I use it just directly in Python code?
You can use it directly in Python code, and you can do 2 really interesting things with it. So one is you can just tell it just to open. And so then you can have a Python script and you say, just open my figure, it'll open a web browser and display your figure. So you can use, that's really useful for all kinds of things. The other thing that you can do is you can tell your figure to HTML, and it'll just produce the HTML. So I can show, if I run this, oops. I don't know why I didn't show it. Let's see what this does. Okay, I don't know why it's not. Oh, there it is. Oh no. I don't know why I didn't like it. But you can run to HTML, and so then you can like write like routes in your say you're using Flask, you can have a route where you render the figure on the server and just return it, return the HTML from the server. So that's how like you can use it in Python. You can also in JavaScript, you can create them on the fly in JavaScript in the browser. So sorry about that. I don't know why this isn't working. I hate that. Okay.
No worries. It's just demo syndrome. It's all good. Every time. And then so last question for you. Referring to your SQL query from earlier, why do you group by bin rather than just using the time?
There was a bug in Data Fusion. So Data Fusion is the sorry, let's just think. There was a bug in the query code in Apache that if I tried to rename this as time, it didn't work. There was some error. That bug may long since be fixed. I don't know, but I thought it would be just nice to demo the like how to use pandas to do interesting things. Like you can do so much more with pandas. You can join different, like you can make different data frames from totally different sources and join them together. You can do really fast, really interesting filtering. Yeah, you can window and find moving averages and like do all kinds of statistical analysis with things, etc. So that was just like a really lame. This is like a really lame, really light use of pandas here, just to give a taste.
Sweet. And then I guess last one is, so you touched on it a little bit earlier about either doing aggregation client side or server side. So is your recommendation depending on use case? So is it sort of, have your cake and eat it, where you would have all of your raw data?
Yeah, it's totally dependent on your use case now. So that's like really like a decision that you can make. Like in general, if you're not going to be doing a lot of data manipulation and you're just summarizing and aggregating, probably you might as well just do it in SQL, because there'll be less data moving over the wire. But the thing that's changed is because of the arrow format and the data is coming over an arrow, it's very highly compressed. It uses a columnar format to like have it very highly compressed. And then the libraries that can manipulate the arrow format are optimized for it. So whereas in the past, you maybe didn't want to pass so much data over the wire, like over the internet, and maybe you didn't want to do so much heavy work because it would be slow in your client code. That's not always the case anymore. So more and more people are starting to just bring back a lot more data in Arrow, because they can do more powerful things with their client code.
Super sweet. So I guess I'll give it a quick second. If there's no more questions for Rick, what I will do is also show on screen Rick's Slack handle. How cool is that? Yeah, love it. I honestly love the StreamYard. Okay. So yeah, if you have any questions for Rick after the fact, if you're watching this as a recording, please don't hesitate to reach out to him or one of us. If you're too scared to actually reach out to Rick, it'll be okay. He doesn't bite.
I don't know why anyone would be scared to reach out to me.
Yeah.
Okay. I'll yeah, looking forward to following up. And thanks for inviting me to do this, Jay.
No worries. Thank you for coming on, Rick. That's super sweet. And we'll catch everyone next time for the next one. Thanks, everyone. Bye.